It is a pleasure to welcome Professor Arvinder Ansari ma'am, whom I uh, personally know, and I got guidance in different phases of my academic career at the same time. Welcome, ma'am. Ma'am, today we'll be talking on feminist methodology in sociology. So, in social research, diverse methodologies are not just a choice, but it is a necessity because the social realities that we intend to understand demands, different kind of methodologies to understand them. The macro or the quantitative methodologies at times help us to arrive at some sort of generalization and to measure social realities. On the contrary, qualitative methodologies helps us to understand the lived experience and the in the context of the social reality. In this context, it is my pleasure to again welcome ma'am, who will be talking on feminist methodology. Feminist methodology again is very important, contribution from the perspective that it reminds us that knowledge is never neutral. Knowledge is always contextual, and it is based on the kind of power relationship that is responsible for the kind of knowledge that is produced. So with this, I'll again welcome ma'am, and now I'll request my colleague Dr. Suraj to introduce ma'am to the audience.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Sociology Special Lecture Series of RC1, Theory and Practice in Sociology, and in association with Department of Sociology, Nagaland University, Lumami. Welcome, Professor Arvinder Ansari, ma'am.
Thank you.
We have been running this lecture series for almost 3 years, and in every lecture, we invite a specialist on a specific field and specific topic. Today, we thought to have Professor Arvinder Ansari, ma'am, with us. A brief introduction about her before she begins her lecture. Professor Arvinder Ansari is a distinguished sociologist and professor in the Department of Sociology, Jamia Milia Islamia University, New Delhi. She has been working in this field, I think, more than 28, 30 years, and she has combined institutional leadership, social research, as well as active civil society work. She has served as honorary director of Center for Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy, and also served as a head Department of Sociology, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. She was also the former director of Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies. She completed her PhD in MPhil from JNU. Her PhD was on impact of communal violence on women, and she has an MA from Jamia Millia Islamia. Uh, Ma'am's area of research includes ethnicity, minority studies, gender and intersectionality, peace and conflict studies, cultural studies, sociology of religion, sociological approaches to risk and uncertainty. And she has served in different bodies, academic bodies, and also in executive boards of RC1, Armed Forces and Conflict Resolution, RC32, Women in Society. She was also active and actively involved in the Australian Sociological Association as well as Canadian Sociological Association. And she has collaborated with several projects with University of Birmingham, Budapest University, among others. Professor Ansari has also served as a elected member of Management Committee of the Indian Sociological Society, and she was the founder convener of RC26 Minority Studies, which is doing very well today, thanks to her contribution. She was also founder secretary of Delhi Sociological Association, which has recently started. So her expertise is there in academics, in developing institutional context of social research with sociological bodies, as well as her research projects with ICSSR, UGC, and others. So with this short introduction, I would like to invite Professor Arvinder Ansari, ma'am.
Okay, at the outset, I would really like to thank Dr. Suraj Beri, who is a colleague, a dear friend, Professor Nilika Mehrotra, and Sumit for giving me this chance to interact with all of you here. And it is always enriching experience. When you speak, you learn. You also, I mean, I feel that you are always learning, and teaching is something which is evolving. So, Suraj, I really thank you from the core of my heart to be here and to talk about the topic which is very close to my heart, which is so much integrated into my research and teaching. As Suraj was telling all of you about my research and my teaching, he, has used very lovely and beautiful words. Thank you, Suraj. I mean, I hope that I come up to your expectations. Friends, I have been teaching sociology of gender, sociology of minority studies, violence, and majorly looking them from the perspective of gender lens. And that is something which is naturally coming to me. And why it is naturally coming to me is also has a reason. Most of my research focuses on gender in situation of conflict and violence, like communal violence, half widows in Kashmir. And when I was talking about, I was doing research on Muslim alienation in Meerut and Delhi. There also, I was looking. I mean, there it was not specifically from gender perspective, but gender was a very, very important component. So, being engaged into research and teaching has a reason because I was myself a victim of 1984 riots and had experienced it. At that stage, I never knew that, in feminist discourse, it is called autoethnographical. But as I, continued in my journey of academics, so I was also maturing, learning, and now I can relate so much so with the feminist methodologies. So so much so with the feminist methodologies, methods, research, epistemology, that it's very important. And I always love to talk about Pamela Abbott's first chapter, that where are women in sociology? The perception of sociology, the sociological sociological imagination from gender perspective or from feminist perspective becomes very important. And very importantly, very important question which students have been always asking us, that is there something distinctive about feminist approaches to methods, methodologies, and epistemologies? So, friends, I have titled my topic today, knowing from the margins feminist methodology in sociology. That's very important. I'm sorry you have to bear with my shaking picture because something is wrong with the internet connection and I'm not able to log in from my laptop. So now this is a very important concern. Are there separate feminist methods, methodologies? What is it that, and why it is very important to know the social reality differently from the gender lens also? Uh, so, uh, given this diversity of debate, that are there feminist methodologies, epistemologies, or simply feminist approaches? Now, there has been a consensus that there is something which constitutes in literature, in documentation, in women's studies, which is called feminist methodologies and epistemologies. And answers to these questions are not very simple or straightforward. Because, if we look at the feminist studies, feminism, women's studies, gender studies, it is an evolving project. And feminist reflections and methodological and epistemical dimensions are not very straightforward. There are dilemmas in the research also. And now it is very important, the question which was raised once by Lauren Court, that is the sex of knower epistemologically significant? Now, this is a very, very important question. Now, from where did this debate started? Though we know a very prominent figure in feminist methodology, Sandra Harding, talking about feminist and positionality. Um, Dorothy Smith also talking about feminist epistemologies and stand positionality. So there, I mean, is something which is very important. It is important that, to respond to Lauren Coates' question, is the sex of novel epistemologically significant? To some extent, yes, it becomes significant because the construction, the narrative, the interpretation of the social phenomena is definitely impacted by the social positionality of the individuals in the society. And my engagement with the research in minorities, marginals, social exclusion has, made me sensitive to this question and has made me to think about it uh, a lot. And when we look at the feminist discourse since 1970s, so this question of grappling with masculinity, power, authority, and knowledge creation has been a significant question. If I go back to Pamela Abbott's sociology, feminist sociology, or sociological imagination from feminist perspective, where she says that when we talk about disciplines, we always talk about fathers of disciplines. Where are the mothers of discipline? And sociology, which is a discipline, which is a subject which talks about society, does not talk about the founders in sociology. When we talk about Simone de Beauvoir, we place her in gender studies or women's studies. Or in, when we talk about her, she's mentioned in the last section of the social theories. So it becomes very important that we look at social realities from, and we try to understand the society, we try to understand the position of margin, vulnerability, minority from the bottom approaches also. And there are a lot of significant works which have been done. So when we look at from the onset, these challenges were being made across many disciplines. In natural sciences, physical, behavior sciences, the emphasis was on exposing masculine bias in science as perhaps the best revealed in valuing of traditional masculine characteristics. And we see Sandra Harding herself being scientist, and these days we talk about STEM, and it has become an important concern for the government to ensure that we retain women in STEM. But very interestingly, if we look at feminist epistemologies and methodologies, so these discussions owe great debt to feminist scientists who relentlessly critique the effect of gender bias in the collection, interpretation, and organization of data on sex differences in behavior, biological and biobehavioral scientific research, documenting the exclusive use of male subjects in both experimental and clinical biomedical research, as well as in the selection of male activity and concomitant male dominant animal population. So, feminists pointed to blatant invisibility of females in these research protocols. Where are women? How are we understanding women's stand? Positionality here becomes a very important question. When these feminist scientists and scholars were scrutinizing research in natural and physical sciences, feminist philosophers were actively engaged with defining the relationship between feminism and epistemology, defining epistemology as philosophical inquiry into the nature of knowledge, what justifies a belief, and what we mean when we say that a claim is true. That the question of how feminism intersect epistemology becomes a very, very important question, and feminist philosophers have struggled with many of the problems that have vexed traditional epistemology. Epistemology is not knowledge creation, and the traditional epistemology, which talks about knowledge itself, the epistemic agency, justification, objectivity, and whether and how epistemology should be naturalized. There is a knowledge system there, but how do we understand that knowledge system becomes very important concern. Let me give you an example, very interesting example. These days we are talking about digitization, and we are using digital discourses in health. Sociology have become very important question. And there is also a claim that digitization has increased the access to health applications, and especially M applications, mobile applications, and it has led to a better and informed decision making. But my dear friends, when we look at the access to the digitization, digital platforms, I can understand that access is there because everyone owns mobile phones these days. It's a very, very important or a very kind of a necessary gadget which everyone has. But my concern is the access is fine, but what about agency? For example, if we look at the studies on using of contraception or the question of sexuality, so it's very guarded. So there are various follow-up questions which are being used by these digital apps, but the control of these gadgets are with the men in the family, and they don't allow their women to talk about these important issues. They feel that these are stigmatized to talk about contraception, to talk about sexual behavior, to talk about sexuality. So, when we claim that reproductive health has made a lot of progress and we have now, access to digitized platforms, but here the question of agency becomes very important. And that was the concern of feminist philosophers that, okay, we have identified, we know that there is an androcentric bias in male, in knowledge creation, in knowledge narratives. But how we can neutralize this epistemology, it is very important. One is to have a counter narrative. So, while addressing these traditional epistemological questions, feminist epistemologists have done so much of the research, and they have also argued that feminist epistemology is different. It consists and it's in attention to epistemological concerns arising out of feminist projects which prompt reflection of nature of knowledge and our methods for attaining it. Very interesting, voting behavior. We all talk about voting behavior, and there have been a lot of researches on voting behavior, and especially when you look at, I mean, women has become a very important constituency in elections these days, and there have been a lot of writings and documentations. But if you look at the voting behavior, how it is guarded, how it is shaped becomes a very, very important question. What kind of freedom they have in deciding is also becoming very important question. So now, these feminist projects are very important. When I'm saying feminist projects, I'm not only referring to research projects, I'm also talking about the knowledge production. The project of knowledge production becomes very important, and how knowledge is produced is also very important. Therefore, feminist epistemology is very important in interpretation. In interpretation, it becomes very important, and it is unique because feminist epistemology is not something which is we are talking about in abstract. Feminist methodology is a very, very unique uh, method. It's a very, 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 very unique system of knowledge production, which has three very important characteristics, which have been pointed out by Sandra Harding. One is feminist empiricism, feminist standpoint epistemologies, and transitional or postmodern epistemologies. So these epistemological categories are very important, but they are also very complex. Now, for instance, when we talk about feminist empiricism, which is seen as a response that emerged largely from feminist scientists and feminist critiques of science, it was it we have to look at it started from there. Then it was also the cumulative impact which came from the philosophical tradition, the diverse feminist philosophical traditions. Now they also kind of gave values, they also kind of started informing this empirical inquiry and how scientific methods can be improved in the light of feminist demonstrations of sex bias as a traditional positivistic practice of science. Now, a very simple argument when we talk about contraceptions. and especially, in sociology of gender and sociology of in population demography, we talk about contraceptions, and there are many researches which show that contraceptions also have a sexist bias. Now, this is a very, very important question, that the question of female sexuality, female desire is somewhere ignored, and that is why we have plethora of contraceptions which are meant for, and researchers have proved us that the contraception for women outnumber the contraceptions for men. So it is very important that how do we inform these uh, concerns, and how these are embedded into the epistemology becomes very important. Now, very interestingly, if you look at the impact of contraception, especially the pervasive contraceptions, the impact they have on the mental health of the women are also documented. So it's very important that the question of agency should be considered here. Uh, Now, all the feminist empiricism is also very important, because again, it highlights very important three key elements. The first is that all observations, facts, and findings are value tinged, and that value judgments play a critical role in rigorous empirical inquiry. The women's stand positionality, the women's understanding of the situation is very important. There is a world that shapes and constrains what is reasonable to believe, and it does so by impinging on our sensory receptors. A very important example I would like to share from my own experience, which I have shared. I don't know if some of you have heard this, so please pardon me. But it's a very, very important um, example which I want to share. Now, for instance, we have policies, and especially health policies, mohalla clinics. Once I was traveling back from one seminar, and my co-passenger was from Ministry of Health. So we were just started chatting, and he asked me, from where are you coming? I told him that I'm coming from a seminar, and seminar was on gender and violence. And he said, मैम आप छोड़ दीजिए, आप औरतों की बात मत कीजिए, औरतों को खुद ही अपनी परवाह नहीं होती है. And I was like, they don't care about themselves. So further in our conversation, I discovered that they had started these clinics in villages. So now the timing of the clinics was early morning, 8 से 1 बजे का timing था. So clinics were from Suraj. It is fine that if I am a bilingual in between, or I mean, you please let me know if there is a problem.
It's fine.
Because
It's fine,
that
ma'am.
you get that spirit into it when you talk in your own language.
Yes.
The flavor, I don't want to lose on that. So I said, क्यों क्या बात हुई? बोले कि देखिए हमने हेल्थ क्लिनिक्स खोल रखे हैं, ये औरतें आती नहीं है, इनको परवाह ही नहीं है, मुफ्त में दवा देंगे हम इनको, बट दे प्रेफर टू गो टू क्वैक्स. वो शाम को क्वैक के पास जाएंगी, आधी अधूरी दवा लेंगी, पर उनका विश्वास उन पे है. So I asked this gentleman, I said, sir, if you know about the everyday life of the women, there, if you know, and of these women who are in villages, most of them are from farming, they are peasants, they have a household. So from 8 to 1, they don't have time for themselves. They can only think about themselves after lunch is over. So उनको अगर आपको clinic देना है, तो आपको उनको शाम को देना पड़ेगा. So this is something which is very important, and this, there is the time. You see that if I have to come to the office in the morning, I also juggle. I have a headache, I'll immediately gulp Disprin, Cerodon, and I'll come to my work. If I'm not in a position to take leave, it's an urgent meeting. And when I go back, then I'll think, okay, now I have to consult. And we also, this is how our life is shaped. Our worldview is shaped. It is not that we are averse to it, that we don't want to, but the policies also have to be beneficiary centric. So these facts and findings are very important when we talk about policy intervention, and that is why most of the feminist methodologies and epistemologies are very important, because if you are saying that we believe in participatory development, when you believe in participatory development, then it has to come. So very important second key concern in feminist empiricism is theory of evidence, and all evidences for science in the end are sensory evidences. Now, evidence is also very important, but not in the positivistic sense, the way positivists talk about evidence in feminist methods and methodologies, empiricisms, evidence and rationalization uh, takes a very, very different parlance. Third is knowers. So now, who are the knowers from the feminist empiricists? This is a very important question. I always tell my students, when you go to the field, you are a knowledge seeker, you are not the knower. The knower is someone else, the knower is in the field. And that is something very important to break that hierarchy. Is a very central. There might be not separate methods of collecting data, but there is a separate ideology, philosophy that, the third element is very important, knowers. Knowers are not individuals, but rather communities, and more specifically, science communities and epistemological communities. Communities, not individuals, acquire and possess knowledge. Now, this is the knowledge is shared, the knowledge is practiced, and this is what they say. For instance, voting behavior, parenting. Another very important concern I would like to share with you from my own fieldwork experience. I was doing this fieldwork with the weavers in Varanasi. So I was, their weaving is a household activity. So when I was doing my fieldwork, so I interviewed these women who were there, weavers and women also, because specifically I did not find women weavers, because women weavers की कोई category इतनी थी नहीं. Now we have, and that is how globalization has impacted. That's a different project. I will not talk. I'll just talk a very important concern. When I was talking to them, and I'm talking about feminist understanding their sense of rationalization. So I asked these women that, what do you earn? How much is your earning? So, the answer I got, and, the answer I got from them was that, what do you mean by earning? आपका क्या मतलब है? मैंने कहा कि आप क्या कमा लेते हैं? बोले मुझे तो पता नहीं, जो भी आता है वो मेरे हस्बैंड के पास आता है, एंड दैट इज, आई सेड आपको कुछ मिलता है उसमें से? सो दैट क्वेश्चन वाज वेरी ऑड फॉर देम. That question was very odd for them. And for me, this question, because coming from Delhi and being a student of gender studies, feminism, so my right on my, income, my share, and all that is what, my socialization was very different from her socialization. So her sense of family, her sense of income, her sense of sharedness was very different. And this feminist empiricism and feminist methodologies have taught me to respect. Though I might agree, I might not agree with her, with my respondent, but this is a diverse opinion. So the communities and not individuals acquire and possess knowledge. So that knowledge, that shared knowledge becomes a very, very important. So while feminist empiricism are linked to post-positivist assumptions um, around different communities of knowers battling for truth and legitimacy in knowledge making, feminist standpoint epistemologies have challenged the differential powers that groups have to define knowledge. And now, knowing from the margins is very important, because unless and until you know and you document, you will not become their. You're not going to change much of their lives. But ethical responsibility, me on as a researcher, is to document their interpretation, their voice, their understanding, their everyday life. So, feminist standpoint epistemologies have challenged the differential power that groups have to define knowledge, and they argue that marginalized groups had a particular claim to knowing. At the core of standpoint epistemology is their assertion that they represent the world from particularly socially situated perspective, which represents epistemic privilege or authority. A very interesting thing. Dadi maa ki nuski. Small thing, but it's a indigenous system of knowledge. And COVID has seen that we went through these nuskas and these totkas in our. So there is a sense, and they have their practice. Now, this rationalization, this becomes a knowledge because of the praxis. उसको practice करते हैं. Now, for instance, my husband met with a small accident last week, and we took him to doctor, and he was having a medication. So my house help came, and she is little elderly. When she saw that wound, अरे आप क्या करती हैं? आपने इनको दूध हल्दी नहीं दिया अभी तक. So, now her understanding, of course, we all know that turmeric has an antibiotic value. So, I said कि उन्होंने दवा ले नहीं, उससे कुछ नहीं होता है, इससे एकदम दर्द खत्म होगा, आप हल्दी लगाइए, हल्दी का दूध दिए. So, these are their understandings. I'm quoting very mundane examples, but that goes to farming, that goes to, even water conservation. If you look at water conservation in Rajasthan, women voices are missing from the policies. But water conservation, the way Bawlis work, the way these are managed, it has a very, very important gender component in that. So, at the core of standpoint epistemology is their assertion that they represent the world from particular socially situated perspective, which represents epistemic privilege or authority, and we should respect, because we have gone there to understand. We go to study tribal societies, we go to study Dalit societies, we go to minority communities. कोई औरत पर्दा करती है, हिजाब करती है, वो हिजाब क्यों करती है? I did a study on veiling. So there are different reasons for veiling. One could be, of course, parda, which comes, ki karna hai. One, there were different. Now these all new hijabs, which come in very fancy styles and very exorbitantly priced. There are many girls in cosmopolitan areas. They take to these headgears, these hijabs, because they look very fancy. They look so fashionable. Then when I was talking to some women in Delhi, I said, आप स्कूटी चलाते हो और फिर आप हिजाब बोलते हो? अरे बोले, दिस इज अ कन्वीनियंस ड्रेस, देखो मैंने नीचे नाइट सूट पहना हुआ है, मैं फटाफट आके अपने बच्चे को स्कूल छोड़ के चली गई. So, who is going to decode this? So decoding in their stand positionality is very important, because women's experience informed by feminist theory provide a potential grounding of more complete and less distorted knowledge claims to men. So hijab is not a sign of subjugation. It can be assertion of identity, it can be convenience, it can be fashion, and it can be subjugation. I'm not ruling out it, but there are different interpretations, connotations to it, which is very important, and we should not lose on that, is very important. So standpoint epistemology has continually emphasized how knowledge must begin in women's everyday, every night world. How I weave, how I integrate, how I balance my professional and personal life is very important. It is not, that is why if we look at the feminist critique of Western white feminism, was because this 9 to 5 office job or is a very, 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 very Western white feminist understanding of the office. For us, it's very different. Or for us, the women working on the field, for us, the concept of hygiene is very different. So, standpoint epistemology has continually emphasized how knowledge must begin in women's everyday, every night world, and how women's lives are the places from which to start off knowledge projects. Standpoint feminists have also been at pains to point out that these experiences, every day, every night worlds or standpoints, must also be located and analyzed within broader relations of ruling or social structures. Again, a very small example, and I really want to connect, and I have been doing. I was looking for a house help. So one house help came, and he came, and my timings are morning in 8 a.m. I need someone to help me with the kitchen and everything, to prepare breakfast and lunch and everything. So I hired this lady, and she came 2 days, and third day again there was a gap. Then I spoke to her. I said, what is the reason why you are not coming? She said, Madam ji, मैं ना अपने husband से छुप के काम करती हूँ. वो जाएगा तो मैं आऊंगी. Now, that is her world of understanding, and that is how she. So, after talking to her, I realized that I might sympathize with her. My empathies, my sympathies are with her. But my dependency on her will jeopardize my own professional response. But that is their world. Now, I said, why do you have to work if your husband is not aligned? Why are you working? She said that, हमारे ऊपर कर्जा बढ़ता चला जा रहा है. He's not able to pay the rent. And every 2 months, 3 months, we have to look for a new house. And it is a pain for me कि हर 2 महीने भर घर बदलना पड़ता है. तो मैं ये सोच रही हूँ कि मैं सिर्फ इतना तो कमा लूँ कि मैं अपना rent निकालूँ. This is one story. Another story was that, there was this lady who is doing cleaning for many houses in our colony. So I asked her that, why do you work? I mean, her husband earns well, well in their own, language. She says that ये मुझे मोबाइल का पैसा नहीं देता है. तो मुझे मोबाइल भी चाहिए, मुझे इंटरनेट भी चाहिए और मुझे हर महीने कपड़े भी चाहिए और मुझे पार्लर भी जाना है. So now this is another, and there are other stories which are need based. So this is something which is very, very difficult, but these are social realities. These are social realities, and these are women's lives and places which are very important when we go and we study domestic violence. So when we study domestic violence, we have to see from where these violences are emerging. When we talk about domestic violence, we always talk to women and victims. We also have to see men, why they, and we have to talk to them. That is something which is a major gap, that masculine voices, the male voices, not masculine voices, but the male voices are also very important to understand these worlds. So to understand the social structures. So when we look at the postmodernist impact on feminist epistemologies, so it is very important to look, one very important thing is we cannot look at women as a unified object of theorizing and a unified subject of knowing, because there is a huge diversity, class, caste, region, religion, ethnicity, race is also very important, and how we look through these intersectionalities becomes very important. So the strong claim for socially situated knowledge translates into greater attention to the concept of reflexivity and the role of researcher to construct knowledge looking through the gaze of intersectionality, which is very important. So now, there has been the narratives in postmodernism. For instance, we talk about the death of history, the death of meta-narratives, the death of man. But it's not true. The intersections between feminism and postmodernism have led to a very different kind of articulation, which has paved the way for plurality of perspectives. Now, very important is that we have to look at these plurality of voices. Very interesting thing is these days we used to talk about like women feel confident when they get job. We presume that everyone who's studying, who's female, who is studying wants to be economically independent. But my dear, when you talk to women, it is very interesting. Now women have realized, many women, many young women, they say that if we are when you ask them, no, I don't want to work. If I am getting married and if I am having children, I want my husband to look after me, to provide me. I don't want to work because I don't want to tax myself. I don't want to take the double burden. Now, friends, here it is something different. It is coming as an agency. So this is also changing. So we have to take this critique also into the mind, that these postmodern, post-colonial critiques have highlighted the importance of multiple and fragmented perspectives. Feminist standpoint has moved into a pluralistic direction, acknowledging many situated standpoints. We used to have, this is one discourse where women feel, okay, I am educated women, I have a degree, but I don't want to. Why should I? If I am supposed to look after the family, so let me look after family, enjoy looking after the family. So my capability is not tied to my pay pack, is also very important. But all of us have ingrained this in our minds that नहीं, अगर मेरे पास qualification और मेरे पास equally matching job नहीं, तो that means I'm not capable. So we have to change these notions. We have to talk about these pluralistic, this is one example. Then plurality also talks about intersectionality of caste, class, ethnicity, region, which is very important. So these experiences are very important, and these experiences emphasize on communities rather on individual knowers. So now it is very important for us that we look at feminist epistemologies from different positions, knowing, knowers, and know. Now, who can be the knowers? What can be known? And how do we know, and what we know becomes a very, very important question in feminist research. That who is the known? And what is, uh, known? And how do we know what we know is very important. And here, why I am raising these questions, the ways of knowing in feminist research is very important. Why it is important? Why it is important? Because, the ethical concerns are very important. And in the backdrop of this, the question whether, uh, uh, how we kind of talk about feminist knowledge becomes very important. One is the ethical question: how do we know, and what do we know, and how do we reproduce the ways of knowing? Second is the critical engagement with the feminist epistemology becomes very important. With feminist epistemology, with the gynocentric epistemology. So uh, Sandra Harding, Dorothy Smith, Louise Anthony, they have addressed these questions. So they also have asked a very important question. Do we need, in order to accommodate these questions, insights and projects, a specifically feminist alternative to currently available epistemological frameworks? So now very important concern is that about the narrative. The narrative that the narrative which is there in the mainstream discourse, how we turn this narrative, which becomes a holistic narrative, is very important. One question is that, okay, do we really need feminist epistemology? In the initial phase, the answer was yes, we need feminist epistemologies, but postmodernism has critiqued this. It says that no, not necessarily. We need feminist epistemology. I think engaging with social phenomena from holistic perspective also is very important, because methods and methodologies need different philosophies and different orientations. They remaining same have to capture the heterogeneity in the lives of women becomes very important. So the question of power, the question of reflexivity also became very important in feminist research. So, while Harding herself had accepted that techniques for gathering data are not different, but the way these the data is analyzed, interpreted is definitely different. Now, different is not the analysis, but is the intention, the philosophical discourse. The question of feminist versions becomes very important. So that is very important. Feminist sociologists have made important contribution to this debate, the learning, as they begin to criticize positivism as a philosophical framework, and more specifically, its most acute methodological instrument, that of quantitative methods for its practice of detached and objective scientific research. One very important criticism of feminist methodologies has been the abstract objectivity scientific. They say that you cannot be detached. Attachment and engagement is very important to holistically understand the lives of our respondents. It's very important, because you cannot detach. This abstract objectivity does not give life and spirit to the discipline. This life and spirit to the discipline is very important. So when we talk about such concerns, so there was a lot of debate among the feminists, and I would like to quote Dorothy Smith, where she says, and I quote: Sociology has been based on and built upon within male social universe. While further lamenting in her seminal work the everyday world as problematic, that the lives of women are largely left to novelists or poets. This rendered invisible within the knowledge academies. Women's lives in female dominated domains such as domestic work and care of children, the ill and the elderly. Friends, this is very important concern which Dorothy Smith raised in 1974, and we so this problematization, making visibilizing the women's world was very important and essential. Why was it very important and what was its contribution? Today in 21st century, we talk about sociology of care and sociology of emotions, which becomes very important when we talk about sociology of child, youth, the how women as care providers have been perceived, how their roles have been invisibilized, and how their contributions have been marginalized became a major concern. The attempt, even which Hilary Graham has raised in her writings, is that there has been attempt always to fit women's life into male theories, like trying to fit a round peg into square hole. So, a very interesting anthology by a British sociologist, Anne Oakley, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with her work, Housewifeization, where she talks about her experiences, her connection with her respondents. That becomes very important. And Oakley still stands as one of the most cited articles within this discussion, challenging the masculine assumptions of proper interviews that dominated the sociological textbooks of the time. Oakley argued that some methods were better situated to feminist aims and these could be viewed as feminist methods. Oakley suggested that, contrary to an objective, standardized, and detached approach to interviewing, the goal of finding out about people. Uh, Sorry, am I connected? You can. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, we
Hi.
are there.
There was a call which I wanted to disconnect. Sorry. So, when I was talking about Anna Oakley, and so Oakley suggested that we have to overcome objectivity, standardized, and detached approach to interviewing. Now, this is, when she did the study of reproductive health, and she went to the birth clinic where women, were delivering their children. So, she, as her own experience as mother giving birth was very significant. And she further says, uh, you know, the goal of finding out about people through interviewing was best achieved when the relationship of interviewer and interview is non-hierarchical. Very important fundamental principle of feminist methodologies. And when the interviewer is prepared to invest his or her own personal identity into the relationship. Drawing on her interviews with mothers, she maintained that her own identities as mother came to act as a leveler against the power hierarchy in the interviewer relationship. Very significant, friends, and I have experienced this with my own studies, being a victim of 1984 riots when I was doing my PhD and trying to understand communal violence from feminist perspective and interviewing the victims of 1984 riots and 1992 violence, Surat violence. Those ethnographic experiences were helping me to connect, to understand, to share, and to rationalize. I mean, I think there is a lot of subjectivity, but our training as in research methodology also helps us to overcome this subjectivity. But the depth, the enrichment which comes from these thick narratives, and I think the case study methods is something which Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Manan, and many other scholars have talked about, and the enrichment it brings to the discipline is enormous. So, so we both share the same gender socialization, critical life experiences, social distances can be minimal. So here, two things are very important. One is the connection, and second is non-hierarchy. That researcher does not enter into a field, in a very hierarchy as a knower, as knowing everything and telling, oh, ऐसे पानी पीना गलत है, ऐसे जमीन पे बैठना गलत है, पॉल पे सोना गलत है. Again, I'll tell you one very interesting example. We went when I joined Jamia Milia, Islamia. Within my joining, within 15 days of my joining, I was supposed to take my students to a field trip to Chota Chaibasa. I had been myself to field trips when I was a student there in my master's, but this as a teacher, this assignment and the role also is completely different. So when I went there to Chota Chaibasa, the arrangements were made to stay with the village Ho tribe. This was Ho tribe, and the arrangement was made to stay with the head men of the village. जब हम लोग वहां गए तो हमने देखा जो बिस्तर थे उनके वो पॉल पे थे. These are kind of bamboos kind of thing, वो जो उसका निकलता है सॉफ्ट सा, और उसके ऊपर उन्होंने एक चादर बिछा दी और उन्होंने बोला कि ये आपका बिछोना है. सो माय स्टूडेंट्स दे वर लाइक, हम इस पे सोएंगे, हम इस पे कैसे सो सकते हैं, हाउ कैन वी स्लीप ऑन दिस there. I said, and very interesting, this was the first shock which came to them. Then next they asked for the bathrooms. There were no bathrooms, there was one toilet. This is, I'm talking about 1995. I'm not talking about Swachh Bharat jahan pe toilets ban gaye. Or this was, they had a toilet, they had made a toilet, but abhi usme toilet seat unhone ईंट से बनाई थी, उसमें अभी दरवाजा नहीं था, उन्होंने पर्दा टांग दिया. And for bathing, there was a stream. उन्होंने कहा अगर नहाना है तो आप यहाँ नहाना. Now my students were after my life that, madam, what will we do? ये तो हो नहीं सकता. But that was their reality. That was their reality. I said, you have to accept that. आपको ऐसे ही होना होगा अगर आपको इस ट्राइब के बारे में जानना है, इनकी लाइफस्टाइल के बारे में जानना है, और आपको अपने रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट्स पूरे करने हैं और आपको अपने मार्क्स लेने हैं, तो आपको करना पड़ेगा ये. Now this is very interesting thing that when we do our PhDs, we go there. This is a very interesting another example which I would like to share with you. So these reflections are very important. So I made them understand, they enjoyed it, but thoda naak muh chadha ke, because light bhi nahi hoti thi, aur subah jo hai, we had to be back in the village before the dawn. So matlab 6 baje hame wapas aa jana hai, khana kha lena hai. And these were the students from Delhi jinki night life badi active aur badi मस्त हुआ करती है. एंड स्पेशली कमिंग फ्रॉम जामिया, जिसके आसपास जो पूरा एक अच्छा सा फूड, अभी तो उसको फूड स्ट्रीट्स कहते हैं, उस जमाने में फूड स्ट्रीट नहीं था, बट क्वाइट वेरी एक्टिव एंड वेरी colorful kind of life. So now these reflections on the inevitability of power differentials within research have extended very important, and it is it has also the one is the equality in research relationships and the ethical dilemmas involved in conducting research with disadvantaged or marginalized groups, especially women, as well as larger epistemological issues involved in attempting to know others. That is very important. And in one of the works, Feminist Dilemmas in Field Work by Diana Wolf, she writes, and she's done her study with in Indonesia. She says, and I quote, "My research was an attempt to analyze and depict their lives, their situation, and the grueling work of factory jobs. I would go on to finish my dissertation, get PhD, get a job based on a talk about this research, make enough money in 1 month to sustain an entire village for several, publish, and I hope make a career. The money I gave to people of the organizations I contribute to will not be able to change much in the lives of those I worked with, despite my good intentions. I was making a situation for myself based on structures of poverty and gender inequality." Now, this is a dilemma which a researcher is facing, and all of us face when we go. And here, a very, very ethical concern is, let us be very, very sensitive. Let us be very, and this is one important mantra of feminist epistemologies, knowledge construction. This sensitivity is very important when you go and you study marginal, vulnerable communities, transgenders, sex workers, women in different situations, questions of extramarital, polygamy. Lot of issues are there. Trauma, especially when conflict. There are a lot of cases. I know I'm running short of time. I think I've already exceeded an hour. So now these are the questions which one has to deal. So we are not in a position to change their lives much. But what we do, what our researchers will do, at least is honestly documenting their standpoint, their grievances. Again, coming to my, this study in Chaibasa, when I was doing my we had taken these students there for their project works. So the problem was that there was encroachment of their land, and it was given to mine, big industrialists. So when these people, they served us breakfast in the morning. वो पूरी सब्जी उन्होंने हमको खिलाई और lunch के लिए भी दे दी. So when we went to the field and when we were going to the site, we saw them eating, drinking tari. So I asked them that why are you drinking tari? आप क्यों नहीं पूरी सब्जी खा रहे? They said there are two reasons. One reason is कि ताड़ी 1 किलो ताड़ी जो है उससे अगर जो मैं ताड़ी बनाता हूँ वो 6-7 लोग पी लेते हैं और इससे एक अलग तरह की एनर्जी आती. वी डोंट हैव मनी टू इतना पैसा नहीं कि हम सबके लिए लंच बनाएं. हम डिनर करते हैं, दोपहर में हम ताड़ी पी के रह जाते हैं. सो दैट वाज आल्सो नाउ दिस अंडरस्टैंडिंग दिस नॉलेज इज समथिंग, एंड दे वर ऑल वेरी scared कि ये हमारे पूर्वजों की धरती है, because how tribal societies are linked with their ecosystems, the ecology is also very important. So now this is ironic that scholars are discovering the methodological, and this is what feminist epistemologies have talked about, the methodological challenges which are there. So how do we overcome, how do we navigate, and how do we talk about it? And I think very interesting thing is that when we look at Gayatri Spivak's work, when she says, can subalterns speak? I think this is very important fundamental question which one has to keep in mind. Another very significant aspect of feminist research is that feminist researchers have long advocated that feminist research should not just be on women, but for women and where possible with women. Second very important thing is that feminist researchers have actively engaged with methodological innovation through challenging conventional mainstream ways of collecting, analyzing, and presenting data. Feminist research is concerned with issues of broader social change and social justice. Feminist research is distinct from non feminist research because it begins from the premise that nature of reality in Western society is unequal and hierarchical. Again, feminist research is very important because it is imbued with particular theoretical, political, and ethical concerns that make these varied approaches to social research distinctive. Friends, I'll stop here because otherwise, you can ask me questions. It's almost 1 hour. Suraj, it's enough, or, Suraj? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Yeah. I hope I'm audible, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're very much audible. You are very much.
Okay. Before I take over, I would like to introduce myself. Myself, Professor Atungovang from Department of Sociology. I have to jump in, ma'am, because of network issue here in Lumami. Many could not join, even our own faculty, scholars, students could not join, as I've said, because of this network issue today. Anyway, thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful, insightful, enlightening speech. We totally enjoy your presentation. You really gave us a clear and factual analysis about you have covered up many things, thoroughly critical about epistemological stance that question who produce knowledge, for whom, and under what condition. And you have also covered up many things about feminist research concerning about ethical issue, imperialism, epistemology, gender, many things, contraception, and so on. Anyway, I will not touch everything. So now, having said this one, in short, I would like to give time for now question and answer session, for looking forward for the participation in a discussion and insight from our speaker, for our respected speaker. So now, may I give time to the participants if you have anything to ask, to clarify, or to learn more from our resource person. Time is given to the participants, please. Or you can give if you don't feel, you can give in the chat box also.
I'm sorry.
Hello.
I had to manage my lecture from mobile today. I don't know.
It's okay, ma'am. It's okay. It happens here, especially in our state. Today, what happened? From morning, it was raining. That's where network issue is here. Yeah, we have. Yeah, kindly, please. Yeah. You can ask the question. You can. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are
Sumit,
audible,
very
please.
much.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, ma'am. This is Sumit, and it was very nice to attend your lecture and look into the key insights. I have only two points of queries. The first one would be since nowadays we are more into something called decolonization and decoloniality of knowledge, and which posits itself, that is to say, the indigenous one vis-a-vis the Eurocentric European and the other one. So, do you find the possibilities of quote unquote decolonial turn in feminist research methodology? That was the first one. And the second one would be would you be kind enough to just have a brief outline on feminist responsive pedagogy? Because it is in the classrooms of the colleges, universities that the knowledge is being created. And we as a faculty members do interact with boys and girls together. So, do we have something and what are its challenges and possibilities? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sumit. Yeah. Do we take all the questions or I respond to you? Very interestingly, when you are talking about decolonization, and we see that if you look at the whole emergence of feminist epistemology, the narrative, it is basically questioning the mainstream. It is kind of the yeah. Of course, if you look at the initial stage, it started with the first wave of feminism, where we talked about the Western the white feminism dominated the feminist discourse, the women's movement. But as we move from second to third wave of feminism to now multicultural feminism, where we see different strands of feminism, you see the decolonization process becoming so significant and well integrated and weaved into the feminist epistemologies, because feminist epistemologies talks about that who am I is a very, very important question, because this the intersectionality, the stand positionality is talking about the location. That signifies the diversity and plurality. For instance, if you look at India, so we don't only now talk about Brahminical feminism or Western white feminism. We talk about Dalit feminism, Islamic feminism, multicultural feminism, different strands of feminism, different ways of looking at social realities from different stand positionalities in itself is a very, very important. And I think if you look at the decolonization discourse, so the contribution of feminist epistemologies have been immense, and they are also, that is what it is saying, that if you look at the work of Shulamit Reinhans, it is very important, where she reflects on 20 different cells and their influence on the research processes, particularly on the work. These reflections are very important and social. And also, I did not kind of talk about it because I had to keep the track of the time, and my day will start now with so many things, that the second shift in the university and third shift at the home. So because some administrative responsibilities which I have to go and attend. So there is this question of power and reflectivity. So the reflexivity in itself is a very, very important uh, discourse, which and power, hierarchy. These are very important questions. Whose knowledge and whose knowledge shapes mainstream? Uh, this is what they have been critiquing. The question of access and agency is very important. So they don't only want access; they also want agency, which becomes very important. Uh, Sorry, second question. What was your second question about feminist?
It was about, ma'am, feminist responsive pedagogy, the way we teach and learn in the classrooms, whether they can be have a
Yes, of course, because when we talk about sociology of gender, so I think the methodology is very, very much feminist pedagogy, and how you kind of, how you stress on inclusivity, diversity, intersectionality is very important. That sensitivity now, very interestingly, the compositions of classrooms are changing, and I think that is what it is talking. I mean, the feminist stand positionality is talking about it, and when we adopt this feminist stand positionality in our pedagogies, they are very important, and and it should be, and the feminist methodologies, the feminist pedagogies talk about how to respect differences, and also very important to locate the plurality in the text, interpretative text, and context. Context and text become very important in pedagogy. It becomes very important in pedagogy because it actively reflects on personal, interpersonal, institutional, pragmatic, emotional, and theoretical, epistemological and ontological influences, and how we kind of how we deliver them, how we transmit them is also very important concern. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Anyone else would like to give time to the participants?
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening.
So thank you so much for the lecture. And I wanted to ask, since you talked about reflexivity, which is very important in a feminist research, how do one practice reflexivity in one's own feminist research, so that we make sure that our own bias is not hindering the research process? And it's sensitive is also another thing that is very important. So that was my question.
That's very important question. That how we transform ourselves is also one very important thing. The praxis. That is, I think I talked about in my lecture, that when we enter to the field, we don't enter with the relationship between the researcher and the researchee. The respondents is very important. It should be non-hierarchical, and the respect for the differences is very important, that is one. When you are on the site and when you come back to the offices where you decode, where you are sitting in the isolation, so the how you present that work, and it should be the voice, their voice should dominate the interpretation, is very important. So, reflective practice is very important because it indicates a thoughtful process, and how we kind of, the responses to stimuli are very important, and reflexivity is also linked to accountability. How the way we are, interpreting that knowledge, so that accountability and accounting for the knowledge produced is very important.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
And very important other point is that the concern on reflexivity, the practice, is that we have to see that impartiality, perspectival nature of the knowledge claims is very important. So, the production of theory is very important. It's a social activity, which is culturally, socially, and historically embedded in situated knowledges. And situatedness should be interpreted in very, very, accountable way, I would say. Thank you.